Alright, first of all, it's very important to know that Dune: The Dark Ages does require you to have a GPU that is capable of doing hardware ray tracing. They don't have like a software fallback, so you do need a GPU that can do ray tracing, which means anything starting from the RTX 2060, for the AMD anything in the 6000 series, and if you have an Arc Intel GPU, you are probably fine because they do have some ray tracing cores. So just keep that in mind, you do need a GPU that can do ray tracing, okay? It's very important to know because, again, if you have, for example, a GTX, the game will probably not run for you, alright? So keep that in mind. Alright, so we're gonna take a look at the system requirements as well as the settings for the game, some comparison stuff, and we have the benchmarking on native and also with upscaling, okay? So let's take a look at the system requirements. For the CPU, they're recommending a Zen 2 or a 10th generation CPU. Again, it's not really a hard requirement. As long as you have something within that range, you should probably be fine because the game is not really demanding on the CPU, right? They have 16 gigabytes of RAM, 100 gigabyte of available space, and they are requiring you to have an SSD, so keep that in mind as well. Now let's take a look at the graphics cards. They're recommending the RTX 2060 Super or better, or the AMD RX 6600 or better. Now, is this accurate? Again, targeting the 1080p 60 FPS low quality. This is not upscaled or frame generation. This is just straight up, just native performance. And 60 FPS, keep in mind, they don't technically mean exactly 60. It's the average. So something in between 50 and 70 instead, right? So if you take a look at the benchmarking, again, this is 1080p, but everything is maxed out. So Ultra Nightmare, native resolution. If we take a look at the 6600, it's doing 33 FPS, and the 2060 Super, which is the equivalent to the 3060, as you can see on the relative performance chart right here, it is only 3% faster, so it is technically quite similar to the 2060 Super that they're recommending. It's doing only 45 FPS with everything maxed out, 1080p. Again, this is max settings. So if you take a look at the benchmarking that they did, and we take a look at the low, for example, we have low at 117 and Ultra Nightmare at 90 FPS. Again, this is only about 27 FPS difference, which means it's around 23% performance difference. If we take a look at this one here as well, 22 to 101, which is around the same 23% more FPS. So that 33 FPS for the 6600 would go to about between 45 and 50 FPS if it was on the lowest setting, and the 3060 or the 2060 Super would go from 45 FPS to between 55 and 60 FPS instead. So technically it is within that range, but to be fair, it is pretty accurate because they do say or better, so they're not technically recommending these exact GPUs. They are saying or better, so it kind of makes sense. So you would say this is pretty much accurate, all right? So, however, what you can do, you're not technically basically obliged to use low quality, because as we can see, just a little bit of upscaling can do the trick for you. So what you can do, you can go to the settings if you have one of those GPUs, like this one or anything within this range right here. Again, not the 5000 or the GTX, just keep in mind that. Anything within the range of the 2060 Super, the 3060, the Arc A750, the 6600 XT, the A770, something like that, 2070 Super, anything within this range here, what you can do is you can go to the settings and you can go to the upscaler and set it to DLSS for NVIDIA, XeSS for Intel, FSR for AMD, etc. And then set super resolution to quality mode. So upscale it to quality mode, which is about 30 to 35% more performance, and it still looks pretty good at 1080p. I mean, as long as you don't have like a really big monitor, as long as you have like a normal size monitor, like a 21-inch, 24-inch, something like that, it still looks good, especially with the transformer model, like the newest model for the upscaling, right? Which looks as close to native as possible, which is really amazing. So as you can see, if we just kick on some quality upscaling, which is right here, it's everything maxed out, 1080p, quality upscaling, the 6600, it jumps from 33 FPS to 51 FPS, which is very much playable. And we have the 3060, jumps also from 45 to 65 FPS, which makes the 2060 Super around 62, 63 FPS, something like that, because it's really close in terms of performance. So with just a little bit of upscaling, the game becomes very playable. At 50 FPS, still a really good experience. 60 FPS, no need to talk about that. But again, if you are at around like 50 FPS, let's say you have a 6600, you don't technically need to max everything out. So to bring that 50 FPS to 60 FPS, what you can do, you can just basically just reduce a little bit of the settings. As you can see, the biggest jump in image quality is going from low to medium, because that will enable the first step of ray tracing, global illumination, ambient occlusion, shading and shadows, etc. As you can see, this is low and this is medium, right? As you can see, a lot of like ambient occlusion gets enabled. The first layer of ray tracing gets enabled as well, especially here. As you can see, this is low, this is medium. The flames are actually illuminating inside this area right here. And the second biggest jump is going from medium to high, which enables the second phase of ray tracing, which is the reflections. As you can see, the light gets reflected inside this area and it gets illuminated even more, as well as the wall right here gets a little bit more orange because of the flames. As you can see, this is medium, this is high. Hopefully you can see it through the YouTube compression. And also the distant shadows, the distant dynamic lighting and volumetric lighting as well gets enabled on high. As you can see, this is medium and this is high, right? So hopefully this makes sense. You don't technically need to go all the way to Ultra Nightmare, because from high on up, basically low to medium is the biggest, medium to high is also a significant difference, and then from high and upward, it basically just enhances what's already in the image. It doesn't really add anything significant to the image. So on high settings, you already have everything that the game has, except for like maybe like distant shadows and like very like small details that are barely noticeable anyways. So you don't technically need to go all the way to Ultra Nightmare. So if you are struggling with FPS, maybe you have 50, you want to go to 60, bring back from Ultra Nightmare all the way to medium instead, or to high, and see how the game plays for you. All right, so that's what you can do basically with the minimum requirements. If you have any of these cards or anything in between, you can basically just enable some upscaling, put everything to max, and you can have something in between 50 and 70 FPS easily with just some quality upscaling, right? Now you can technically add some frame generation if you use the FSR upscaler, because keep in mind, unlike most games, they don't have the FSR frame generation separated from the upscaler, right? Maybe they will add it later, but for now you do need to use the FSR upscaler if you want to use the FSR frame generation. For example, if you don't have a 40 series card, you have a 30 series, 20 series, you cannot use the NVIDIA frame generation. You can basically switch to FSR upscaler and enable FSR frame generation instead. But keep in mind, frame generation uses a lot of VRAM, so keep that in mind. If you most likely only have 8 GB of VRAM, so it will use some VRAM and it can choke out your VRAM and use a system memory instead, and it will result in lower FPS. So keep that in mind. We'll talk a little bit about VRAM after the recommended settings, but just keep that in mind. Alright, so that's for the minimum requirements. We jump to the recommended requirements. For the CPU, they are recommending Zen 3 family or the 12th generation CPU for Intel. Again, not really a hard requirement. As long as you have something within that range, you should probably be fine. They go from 16 GB of RAM to 32, and the storage is the same, SSD is the same as always. Now, they are targeting the 1440p 60 FPS high quality. Again, native, no upscaling, no frame generation. They are recommending the 3080 or better and the AMD RX 6800 or better, right? So if you take a look at the benchmarking, again, this is 1440p, everything maxed out, native. If we take a look at the 3080, it is doing around 62 FPS, and we have the 6800, it's doing around 42 FPS. I'm not really sure, maybe they meant the XT because this one makes more sense, but again, it's not really available in a lot of countries, so maybe they prefer to recommend this one instead. But again, they did say or better, so it is understandable. Now, it is doing 42 FPS. Now, this is Ultra Nightmare. Everything maxed out. If we take a look at the difference between Ultra Nightmare and High, now it is around 5% FPS, 6% FPS, something like that. So maybe like this 6800 would go to about 47, 48, something like that, or 46 more like. And the 3080 would go to about, from 62, it would go to around 65, 66, something like that. So it is technically, it's kind of accurate, right? It is pretty close. It's not that far, so it does kind of make sense a little bit. Now, what you can do, again, just go and enable some upscaling and problem solved, especially at 1440p. I mean, upscaling at quality looks almost exactly the same as native resolution, especially with the new model of upscaling, so you shouldn't really worry about anything there. Like 1440p quality mode, you're pretty much good to go, and you gain around 30 to 35 more FPS, so it is pretty good. As you can see, from 32 it jumps all the way to 84. On high, this would be around 88, 89 FPS, and the 6800 goes all the way to 65, which on high would probably be around 70-ish FPS, which is pretty significant. Now, the only problem, again, is the VRAM, right? As you can see, if we take a look, for example, at 4K, right? Upscaling or not upscaling, it doesn't really matter. We take a look at the 5060 Ti, it has only 8 GB of VRAM and is struggling to run the game. It's only 13 FPS, right? But if we take a look at the 5060 Ti 16 GB model, it is able to run the game almost close to 30 FPS. So if you just enable some upscaling to quality, it can give you a pretty good experience at almost 50 FPS, right? At 4K, by the way. Meanwhile, the 8GB variant is not even close to 30 FPS. I'm not even sure why they're still making these cards with 8GB of VRAM. It's outdated at this point, but I mean, it is what it is, right? So keep that in mind. VRAM is an issue, especially if you want to enable frame generation. Frame generation, as we said earlier, it does consume a lot of VRAM. Luckily, we have some customization done inside the game. As you can see, we have the texture pool size. This is very convenient and very good that if you have limited VRAM, if you have an 8GB VRAM, probably set this to 1.5 instead, so all the way down. This will give you a lot of headroom in the VRAM capacity for you to be able to even maybe add some frame generation on top. And if you have something between like the 10GB VRAM or 12GB VRAM, then keep this at 2K instead. This will probably be fine. If you're still having some problems, maybe you're playing at 1440p plus frame generation, that can do some problems for you. So maybe even with like 12 or 10GB, especially 10GB, reduce this to 1.5 instead, so you may have a little bit more headroom for the frame generation, right? And if you have a more than 12, if you have like a 16GB card, 24, 32, then you shouldn't really worry about VRAM that much, right? It's only for those who have like maybe 8GB, 10 or 12, right? So hopefully this makes sense. Luckily, we have a solution for this, which is this one right here. So adjust it based on what your card can handle. and you should probably be fine, right? So this is basically what Doom the Dark Ages performance is. Hopefully you can run the game. I mean, the game is pretty well optimized, like from the data we have seen right here. It is pretty well optimized, like even with the lowest requirements, you can pretty much run the game almost close to 60 FPS with everything maxed out. So it is pretty good and it is pretty well optimized, I would say, right? So it is pretty good. Now, this is basically the system requirements. Again, all this information has been provided to you by TechPowerUP, right? Again, really good site. As you can see, you can just check your GPU. For example, if your GPU is not specified here, you can just go to the relative performance chart and you can compare it to one that is, for example, you have a 3060 and they are specifying the RTX 2060 Super. You can just easily see which card is similar to yours, and you can basically gauge the performance that way, right? Which is a really cool feature. Like, it's one of the top tech stuff, like benchmarking stuff, PC, etc., like in the market. It's really good site. I highly recommend using it. Again, also they do like some benchmarking stuff, as you can see, some comparison stuff, like the benchmarking for like 4K, 1080p, 1440p, minimum FPS, everything, VRAM, frame generation, DLSS, performance, like comparison, like everything is in here. As you can see, really good site. I highly, like, it's one of my favorites. I highly recommend using it. All right, so yeah, this was Doom the Dark Ages. Hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, please make sure to subscribe and give it a like. That would be really good support to the channel. If you want more benchmarking videos, more optimization guides, we have optimization guide for Expedition 33, which is a really amazing game, by the way, and we have some other benchmarkings right here as well, so you can check out those videos out, right? So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.